All right. Good morning. It is Monday, which means it's time for our Monday morning high five. Thank you so much for joining us again. This Monday, we are looking at the book of Joshua. We're chapter 12. We're going to talk about the whole chapter again. Not because we're trying to rush and get done with Joshua. Joshua's a great book. Um, but this section all kind of goes together. There's no real reason to break it up. Um, in chapter 12, um, brief summary, it basically just lists and names all the different kings of all the different nations and groups of people that Israel defeated and took possession of their land. So the Bible lists there were two kings that were defeated by Israel while Moses was still alive. They were on the east side of the Jordan River. And then there's 31 kings that were on the west side of the Jordan River that were defeated by Joshua and Israel. Um, and so that's the quick the quick version of chapter 12. It just 30 altogether 33 kings that were defeated, and both Moses and Joshua um, did what God told them they would do, which is distribute this land that they took possession of to the different tribes of Israel. And on the left, if you can see there's a map. You can kind of see exactly the spaces that we're talking about. Um, and so just looking ahead into chapter 13, you'll notice they didn't quite capture everything just yet, but in their initial, campaign and coming in and doing battle, that was all the land that they captured. And so, Rich, what are your thoughts? Chapter 12.
So just kind of looking at it and looking at all these different nations that were being conquered and defeated, it was just amazing because you kind of see God's promise being fulfilled. God's promise of telling Israel what they would have and what He wanted for them and what He had for them, and now you see this coming into play. You see Israel are able to just conquer all these kings and have all this land that they didn't have before. You remember when they left Israel, they didn't have anything. They were in the wilderness wandering, and now if you look at all this land on the left that they were able to obtain and conquer, it's really just amazing. You really just see God's promise being fulfilled. And one of the things that it made me think about was just remembering like the place that you are in, like because of God. Because
Yeah.
sometimes you can, get to and get to a place where God has placed you and God has allowed you to have things and have land and have, resources. And you start to think that you did it on your own. You start to forget about how it was actually obtained. You start to forget that it was God who actually was with you and allowed that to prosper and for that to happen. And just kind of looking at it a little bit, like that's kind of what happened with Israel. They were in the place, they were in the land that God had promised them, but then they started to forget how they got the land. They started to forget, you know how it even occurred. You start to just focus on you, think I did it, it was me, it was my hard work, it was my schooling, it was this, but it it was God who was with them in those battles. Because when they tried to fight on their own, they were not successful. You know.
That's such a great point.
Ugh. And just that's what I reading this chapter has made me just for me it caused me to remember just that it's God who is doing these things. It's God who is allowing us to have these resources, to have these things that we have. It's not nothing is nothing of our own that causes us to be able to have and do these things. So yeah.
Yeah. Nah, I didn't even think about it till you said it, but their record would have been perfect But there was one battle they tried to fight without God. Messed around and took a L.
Yeah, yeah,
That's so crazy, man. Um, and yeah, in that same vein, like you look, I I kind of look back at the latter part of chapter 11 that we talked about last week, and if you go to um, verse number 19 in chapter 11, it says, "There was not a city that made peace with the people of Israel except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. They took them all in battle, for it was the Lord's doing to harden their hearts that they should come against Israel in battle, in order that they should be devoted to destruction and should receive no mercy but be destroyed, just as the Lord commanded Moses." And so you like God basically locked these kings into the mindset of we have to fight. The only people that didn't try fighting was Gideon, and they were the only ones left alive because they did not try to do battle with Israel.
hmm
But all the you see 33 examples where and you know the kings at the very beginning, like maybe they get a pass in a sense because it's like, well, okay. I mean, they didn't really see what was happening. But towards the end, you see, like all these other kings have seen, like, man, everyone that Israel has faced, they've defeated. Should we like, should we just like try and, make peace with them? Nah, let's
right.
fight. Nah, we're gonna fight. And we were talking about it, Rich. Maybe they just thought those other kings, they didn't try this or they didn't
Right.
have what we have, but
Yeah.
all of these people decided we're gonna fight. And it's not just like I think God had already when he made the original promise to Abraham, he had told Abraham, I'm giving the people of that land time to repent. I'm giving them a chance and a time to do right, to recognize me as God. And
hmm
they refused. They didn't. And so when Israel shows up, Israel represents judgment. And once judgment is there, it's, like I don't think the people, all these kings, they didn't at a certain point they should have recognized it. Like, wait a minute, there is something not normal about this. Like God is involved in this. This is judgment, but they just didn't quite see it. They didn't quite get it. They chose to fight. They thought they could, you know. But but yeah, it is I think it says a lot about God and his promise, like you were saying. And I think it says a lot about us, like in our human nature of just, you know, sometimes we just don't recognize uh, the only people that, I mean, even Gibeon was wrong, but Gibeon lived.
Yeah.
Gibeon lived to tell the tale, like they were the only survivors. Everybody else was devoted to destruction. They received no mercy. And it was all part of God's plan. Like God had given them mercy up till that point. But when Israel shows up, there's no more mercy. It's like now it's time for judgment. So
Yeah. As we were kind of talking earlier, just that all these different kings and nations were thinking like they could fix it or they could defeat them. Like I know they didn't
right.
do it, but we can do it. Like because we have this. And it's like just reminded me of like us sometimes where we can see something, and God can be working like in our lives and on us, but we feel like this is the solution. Like nah, I just need more of this, or if I had more money, like I'll be fine. If I had more resources, more of this, like I'll be fine. Instead of like just seeing God's work, and allowing Him to work, we kind of take that mindset of, nah, we're different. I can do this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, and just like what you were saying, when you just consider like where Israel started from being so afraid of these people, from refusing to fight, just from that to, like I said, the only time they lost was when there was sin, when they just, when they had messed up. That
Yeah.
was the only time God had to show them, like, no, like you have to do it my way.
Mm-hmm.
And Pastor Manuel started the new series, God's Business, God's Way.
Yeah.
That's as long as you're doing God's business His way, you see the result. Chapter 12,
Right.
victory, just victory after victory after victory. Didn't matter who against who, didn't matter the circumstance, victory.
Yeah.
And I mean, it could be the same for us. But will we do God's business God's way? That's the biggest thing, the biggest question. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Anything else?
I think that's it for me.
I think that's it for me too. Um, so, thank you all for joining us. We will look at the comments, even if you don't leave any comments. We're gonna look. Okay, we're gonna look. We're gonna respond. A lot of people always give us good morning, and we appreciate it. We'll say good morning back. Um, so we hope that um, we hope that you are actually, like encountering these scriptures for yourself.
Yeah.
That really, honestly, is the ultimate goal. Um, Richard and myself. I think I could speak for Richard. Like we're blessed to in in this encounter that we have with the word, and we want you to have that same blessing, that same like, oh, this is what I can see in this lesson, because we
Mm-hmm.
don't ever cover everything. There's always something that God can reveal to you when you make the choice to encounter His word. So, yeah. Having said that, hope you have a great Monday. Um, and if God says the same, we'll see you again as we get into chapter 13 of Joshua.